This is one of the most remote islands on the planet, Flores, in the heart of Indonesia, a strip of volcanic mountains and dense jungle sitting between two oceans, cut off from the rest of the world by deep water on every side. The local people call the surrounding sea a wall nothing has ever crossed easily. The date is September 2003. In a limestone cave called Liang Bua, a joint team of Australian and Indonesian archaeologists is digging through soft sediment, 7 meters below the surface, searching for something they will never find. What they are looking for is evidence of the first modern humans who passed through this island on their way to Australia tens of thousands of years ago. What they find instead will force science to rewrite the definition of what it means to be human. Their trowels hit something small and fragile in the dirt, a skull, intact but strange, and beside it, curled in the sediment, an almost complete skeleton. The team leader kneels beside it, brushing away centuries of clay. And even before the bones are fully free of the earth, something is deeply wrong. This is not the skeleton of a child. The teeth are worn down from decades of chewing. The bones are fused in the way only an adult's are, and yet the skull fits in the palm of a hand. The entire skeleton, laid out, would stand barely over a meter tall, smaller than almost any adult human ever recorded, on Flores or anywhere else on Earth. Keep that detail in mind, because everything that follows, every argument, every accusation, every twist in this story for the next 2 decades comes back to that single fact. This was not a child. This was a fully grown adult human being, and nothing about her skeleton made sense. The excavation team, led by archaeologist Mike Morwood, cataloged the skeleton as LB1, the first specimen from Liang Bua. But almost immediately, the researchers on site started calling her something else, off the record, half as a joke. The Lord of the Rings films had just taken over cinemas worldwide, and someone on the team looked at the tiny skeleton and said, "She looks like a Hobbit." The name was never meant to be official. It stuck anyway, and it would follow this discovery into every newspaper, every documentary, and every argument for the next 20 years. When the find was published in the journal Nature in October 2004, it did not simply make headlines, it detonated them. A new species of human, small enough to fit inside a child's clothing, apparently surviving on a remote Indonesian island until as recently as 12,000 years ago, a heartbeat in evolutionary time. If true, this meant that while early farmers were building the first cities in Mesopotamia, while agriculture was spreading across Europe, a separate species of human, distant cousins with a brain a third the size of ours, may still have been alive, hunting in the jungles of Flores. The scientific team gave her a formal name, Homo floresiensis. The name would become one of the most contested in the entire history of paleoanthropology. Because almost immediately, a fight broke out. And this fight was not about opinions, it was about the bones themselves, and who had the right to control them. To understand why LB1 caused such an uproar, you need to understand what her skeleton actually showed. Her brain, reconstructed by scanning the inside of her skull, was roughly 400 cubic centimeters. For comparison, a modern human brain averages around 1,300. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, have brains in a similar range to LB1's. By every measure that scientists had used for over a century to define intelligence and humanity, this skeleton should have belonged to an animal barely capable of using a sharpened stick. And yet, scattered throughout the same cave layers, the team found something that contradicted everything her brain size suggested: stone tools. Not crude, accidental flakes, but deliberately shaped blades, points, and scrapers, the kind of toolkit associated with sophisticated planning and the deliberate hunting of prey. Nearby, the bones of Stegodon, a now extinct species of dwarf elephant, showed cut marks and evidence of butchery. Somehow, something the size of a 6-year-old child, with a brain smaller than a grapefruit, had been organizing hunts against animals many times its own size. This contradiction split the scientific community into 2 camps, and the divide has never fully healed. One side argued that Homo floresiensis was exactly what it appeared to be: a genuinely distinct species of ancient human, most likely descended from Homo erectus, an earlier human ancestor known to have spread across Asia nearly 2 million years ago. According to this theory, a population of Homo erectus reached Flores by accident, perhaps rafting across on debris during a storm, and over hundreds of thousands of years of isolation, evolved into something dramatically smaller. This is not as strange as it sounds. Biologists have a name for exactly this process: island dwarfism. When large animals become trapped on small islands with limited food and no large predators, natural selection favors smaller bodies that need less to survive. Flores itself proved the rule. The same sediment layers that held LB1 also held the bones of a dwarf elephant species, barely the size of a large pig, alongside giant rats, enormous storks over a meter tall, and Komodo dragons, the largest lizards on Earth, still apex predators on the island today. Flores was a place where the normal rules of size did not apply. Big animals shrank, small animals grew huge. If elephants on this island could shrink to the size of a cow, why couldn't a population of ancient humans shrink too? But the other camp rejected this entirely, and leading that opposition was a senior Indonesian paleoanthropologist named Teuku Jacob, one of the most respected and powerful figures in his field. Jacob did not believe a new species had been found at all. He argued that LB1 was simply a modern human, a member of a known pygmy population still living on Flores today, whose skeleton had been distorted by a genetic disorder called microcephaly, a condition that causes an abnormally small skull and brain. If Jacob was right, this was not a lost branch of humanity. It was a tragic medical case, misread by overeager scientists desperate for a groundbreaking discovery. The disagreement escalated far beyond academic debate. In late 2004, without the permission of the original discovery team, Jacob arranged for the bones of LB1 to be removed from the research institution where they were being studied and transported to his own laboratory. When the original researchers finally got the skeleton back, months later, they alleged that the bones showed new damage, cracks, and breaks that had not been present before, along with what appeared to be crude attempts to fill and repair sections of the fragile skull. The scientific community was horrified. One of the most important skeletal discoveries of the century had allegedly been damaged in a dispute over who got to be right about it. For years, the pathology camp kept finding new medical explanations. Perhaps it was not microcephaly, but Laron syndrome, a rare growth hormone disorder that causes severe short stature. Perhaps it was a form of Down syndrome. Each theory was proposed, tested against LB1's actual bone structure, and one by one, each was found wanting. The proportions did not match. The wrist bones, in particular, told a story no human disorder could explain. Researchers who examined the shape of LB1's wrist found that it was structurally primitive, closer to the wrist of a chimpanzee or an early hominin than to any modern human, healthy or afflicted with any known disease. A pathological human does not grow a fundamentally different wrist. Something else was at work here. And then, in 2016, the mystery took its most dramatic turn yet. The very foundation the discovery had been built on turned out to be wrong. When LB1 was first announced, her age was estimated using the layer of sediment she was buried in, dated to roughly 18,000 years ago, with other Homo floresiensis remains from the same cave suggesting the species may have survived until as recently as 12,000 years ago. This was the detail that had shocked the world in 2004. Not simply that a tiny human species had existed, but that it might have still been alive at the same time modern humans were already living on the island, perhaps even encountering each other in the dense jungle. But new excavations, using more advanced dating techniques on the surrounding rock layers themselves rather than just the loose sediment, revealed something the original team had missed. The cave floor at Liang Bua is not a simple, undisturbed stack of layers. Over thousands of years, water and erosion had reworked the sediment, washing older material into positions that made it appear far younger than it actually was. When researchers redated the site properly in 2016, the true age of the Homo floresiensis remains shifted dramatically. Instead of 12,000 years, the skeletal remains were now placed between approximately 60,000 and 100,000 years old, and the associated stone tools stretched back even further to around 190,000 years. This new date rewrote the entire narrative. Homo floresiensis had not survived until the edge of recorded human memory. It likely vanished tens of thousands of years earlier, probably not long after modern humans first began moving through the region, and quite possibly around the time of a massive documented volcanic eruption on Flores that reshaped the island's ecosystem. The overlap with our own species may have still happened, but the picture of tiny humans hiding in the shadows of recorded history quietly disappeared. So did this settle the debate? In large part, yes. Today, the overwhelming scientific consensus accepts Homo floresiensis as a genuine, distinct species of ancient human, one of the strangest and most extreme examples of evolution ever documented in our own family tree. But one enormous question remains stubbornly unresolved, and it may never be fully answered. Where exactly did this population come from? The Homo erectus theory has a problem. No Homo erectus fossils anywhere near the size needed to explain such an extreme reduction have ever been found on Flores or the surrounding islands. Some researchers have proposed an even stranger alternative, that Homo floresiensis descended not from Homo erectus at all, but from an even earlier and more primitive ancestor, something closer to Australopithecus, the same distant relative that produced the famous fossil Lucy in Africa millions of years ago. If true, this would mean an incredibly ancient hominin lineage somehow made its way out of Africa and across Asia far earlier than anyone currently believes, a possibility that would upend the accepted timeline of human migration entirely. The evidence for this remains hotly contested, and without more fossils showing the transition, the true ancestry of the Hobbit may stay locked in mystery. And there is one more thread in this story, one that connects the cold, hard science to something far older and stranger. Long before any archaeologists set foot in Liang Bua Cave, the people of Flores already had a name for a creature said to live in the deep jungle. They called it the Ibu Gogo. Local legends describe small, hairy, human-like beings, standing barely over a meter tall, moving quickly through dense forest, capable of mimicking human speech without truly understanding it. Stories passed from generation to generation described the Ibu Gogo as living in caves, much like Liang Bua itself, and vanishing from local memory sometime around the era when Dutch colonial reports first began documenting the island. Anthropologists remain divided on what to make of this. It could be pure folklore, the kind of small forest spirit stories found across cultures worldwide. Or it could be something more remarkable, a genuine, distorted cultural memory passed down across thousands of years of a real, tiny human species that once shared this island with our own ancestors, slowly fading from a living neighbor into a whispered legend. What the discovery at Liang Bua ultimately proved was not just the existence of one strange skeleton. It proved that our own species, Homo sapiens, was never alone on this planet for most of our history. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Siberia. And now an entirely separate branch, isolated on a remote volcanic island, shrinking down to a scale no one believed a human lineage could reach, surviving there for potentially over 100,000 years, while the rest of the human family tree branched and changed elsewhere. Homo floresiensis is not a footnote in our history. It is a reminder that the story of what it means to be human was never a straight line marching steadily toward us. It was always a landscape, filled with different paths, different survivors, and different endings, some so strange that for years scientists refused to believe they were even possible. The bones of a single small woman, found 7 meters below the floor of a limestone cave, changed how an entire field of science understands the boundaries of humanity itself. And somewhere on that same island today, the story she left behind still lives on, half remembered as science, half remembered as legend.